Recording in progress. Okay, so Natalie, I'm gonna start letting people in just as they trickle in, so don't be alarmed if you see more and more people showing up. But why don't you just kick us off with who you are, where you work, and why you're here today?
Yeah, sounds good. Well, hello, my name is Natalie. I am what we call it, a full stack marketer. It's kind of a funny title, but essentially all things marketing, social media, website, design, all of those things for a company called Climate People. Climate People is a startup recruiting agency. Classify ourselves as a sustainable, equitable, and inclusive climate tech recruiting agency. Sorry about that. It's a lot of big words, but essentially it means we are connecting with mission-driven individuals and I guess mission-driven companies as well, and placing individuals in roles that are helping to decarbonize the global economy. In my personal life, I'm a big outdoor enthusiast. I love to rock climb, hike, anything outdoors. And yeah, so I am a big fan of individual action and promoting individual action. So found this job at Climate People, and yeah, it's been awesome to encourage people to take that individual step to get a job in climate and really just do their part. So yeah, excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Why did you decide to start working in climate change? Like, what drew you to this type of work? Why climate tech in specific? And we can talk more about what climate tech means and how to approach it, but I'm curious to know how you got here.
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of been like a whirlwind. Like I said, in my personal life, I'm a huge outdoor enthusiast. I grew up loving nature and really just like wanting to be involved in this space, but I am not a science person whatsoever, and quite frankly, not a math person either. And a lot of times those things are very intertwined. So for the longest time in like college and then my early career, I kind of wrote off my environmental passion as a personal, like a side gig, I guess you could say. And then it wasn't until COVID hit and I was kind of just like feeling a little bit weird in my current role or my old role. And yeah, so I started just like looking around, and it didn't take long for me to realize that this type of like a change, like a issue as expansive as climate change needs people from all walks of life, people from all skills, all backgrounds, all of that. So then I was like, wait, why am I kind of just writing off this passion I have as just like a personal thing when it could be my profession too? So I'll get into this a little bit later on, but I started just applying for jobs, like even jobs that I wasn't necessarily qualified for. And that's one of the key things that I live by now. And I tell all of our candidates and our clients at Climate People is just apply for jobs, put yourself out there, network, and like have those conversations, because having those conversations is what gets you a job. It's what gets your name out there, all of that. So I did that. I came across my boss. I applied for a recruiting role. I have absolutely no recruiting experience, but I liked his company. I liked his business model, and I wanted to have that conversation. So him and I talked, and I was very transparent about the fact that I didn't really want to be a recruiter. But then, yeah, he was like, well, I'm actually looking to hire someone with your skill set. And we talked for about like a month or so. And then, yeah, here I am. And yeah, it's been incredible to actually take that passion and turn it into a profession. And yeah, so that's a little bit about my story. And then you asked something else, but I forgot what you asked.
I probably forgot to, but that sounds like a very cool kind of like non-traditional path into finding a job.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that where a lot of people struggle is like, you know, just applying for hundreds of jobs and kind of like what you said, having a specific skill set and then not knowing how that relates to anything. I kind of went through a similar thing where I was like, I'm bad at math and science. So I don't know what to do with my life. So for people that are in that boat, like before we transition into talking about kind of climate tech in the framework, for people in this boat of like, I want to do something and I want my job to be oriented around that, but I'm not qualified or I don't have the background, like what advice would you give from your own journey?
Yeah. The key takeaway from all of this is applying for jobs is an art. A lot of people think of it as a science, and that's just not the case. If you think about it from an employer or a hiring manager's perspective, when they're placing a job on the internet or putting it up, they're going to put all of those qualifications for their ideal candidate. And oftentimes, like, that's just not out there. It's not what they're going to want. It's not what they're going to get. So if you're looking at that job description and you're like, oh, 4 years of experience, this skill, this skill, this skill, and you don't have that, like, that's okay. Like, you can bring up other things that you have. So it's really easy to get stuck in that negative trance of, this is what I don't have to offer, this is what they want, and I don't have that. But yeah, I encourage you to just flip that perspective and kind of just change the narrative. Like, this is what I do have to offer, and yeah, I may not have this, but I do have this. And yeah, so it is like what I have to offer, not what I don't have to offer. So that's a huge one. And then often, like, people sell themselves short. Like, applying for jobs is a demoralizing process. Like, we've all been there, rejection after rejection, and it's easy to feel negative about, like, the process. So yeah, just being positive, applying for those jobs. And then, like I touched on a few minutes ago, having those conversations is so important. So networking, like 80% of all jobs are from networking, not applying. So message people on LinkedIn, join Slack communities, everything that you can do to have those conversations. Similar to what I did, my boss didn't have the job description posted, but once we talked, it became very evident that he was trying to hire someone. So yeah, that's really important. And then I see this comment, the men compared to women. That's another, there's so many studies on that women often sell themselves short. So yeah, just don't doubt yourself, be positive, be optimistic, and yeah, sell yourself rather than sell yourself short.
Love it. So I want to shift a little and ask you about climate tech. I think we have a good mix of people on this call, and probably people that will watch the recording, that some may already know like what climate tech is and all the stuff that's going on. And I'm curious to know, like, first of all, before we kind of talk about your definition, did you know that you wanted to work in climate tech, or were you just like being outdoors and you wanted to do something related to the environment?
So initially, I didn't even know what climate tech was, to be completely honest. I obviously knew what climate technologies were, but I didn't know it was a field within itself. I did a lot of internships with like grassroots organizations like the Sierra Club and stuff like that. So I thought that's where I wanted to be, just kind of like fighting for climate change. I wanted to be an environmental lawyer for a little bit. So yeah, that's definitely where I started. But then once I started the job search and I discovered climate tech, I realized it was a space where I most definitely wanted to be, mainly because it kind of goes back to the whole like optimism thing. I guess like I'm really just preaching the glass half full right now. But in climate tech, it's all about solutions. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, because oftentimes the environmental rhetoric is very negative and very doom and gloom. And climate tech is quite the opposite. It's kind of like, here's the issue, and then here's what we're doing to reverse that. So I love being a part of that narrative and really just trying to like reinforce the positive and the fact that, yeah, this is the case, but it's not the end. It goes back to the individual action that I was talking about earlier, and just, yeah. So I did not know it was a thing, but I'm very happy to have found it.
That's awesome. And I definitely relate to like a solutions oriented mindset has helped me not drown in like, oh no, the world is burning. So I think a lot of people will probably relate to that. Also, pausing for a second, if anyone has questions, I am just asking whatever is coming to my mind. So if you have questions or comments or whatever, Lyneen, thanks for sharing your comment. Yeah, put them in the chat, unmute, whatever you want to do. You can raise your hand on the Zoom if you want, but yeah, just this is for you to learn whatever you want to learn about. So as we kind of transition a little bit from your personal story into climate tech, I think there's like two types. I mean, I'm sure there's more than two types. Like I'm thinking of like two types of climate change enthusiasts in terms of their professional lives, like people that are looking for jobs and people that have jobs that maybe they want to make more impactful. And I think the climate tech framework that you've kind of been sharing about is like perfect for people, no matter, you know, if you are actively job searching or not. So first question about that, how do you define climate tech? It seems like such a buzzword these days, and I'm curious to know like what's a good way to think about it?
Yeah, of course. So I'm not sure if any of y'all have heard the word climate tech. It is a buzzword. It's a very like new term, and then therefore it's like a very rapidly changing landscape. And there are countless definitions out there. People classify it in different ways. A lot of people refer to it just as clean tech. I would argue there are different entities, but anyways, climate tech, at Climate People, we define climate tech into three categories. You have carbon mitigation, carbon adaptation, and carbon sequestration. We can get into those definitions a little bit later, but essentially any technological service, whether that be software as a service, a web-based tool, a physical satellite, any of those things that works to eliminate, remove, or reduce the harms of climate change is considered a climate tech product. So these technologies can obviously be more industry specific or more general. They fall into countless different categories, but yeah, any technology that mitigates, reduces the harm, or kind of rewrites the traditional framework of climate change is a climate tech technology. I can dive into like the adaptation, sequestration, all of that too, or we can get into that later, whatever.
Yeah, maybe we could do like a little, like a short description and tell us like in the chat or off mute, everyone, like if you want to dive into the specific area. I'm gonna keep this, I'm gonna err on the side of being general for now, but
Yeah.
if there is a specific thing that you want to learn about, tell us, and then Natalie can go into it. But can you just like explain the differences really quickly? Like what is adaptation, sequestration, mitigation? Like why are those the three categories and why are they important?
Yeah. So mitigation is any technology that alleviates carbon in the atmosphere. So an example of that would be innovations in the building sector to try to like get rid of some of the carbon emissions when you're building buildings. Renewable energy would be an example of that, electric vehicles. So yeah, any technology that's removing or alleviating carbon in the atmosphere would be mitigation. And then we have adaptation, which is kind of more the doom and gloom one I was talking about earlier, but not necessarily. It's kind of like climate change is a reality. What technologies can we implement to lessen the inherent harms of climate change? So an example of that would be like a sensor that detects pollution, drones for mapping droughts, anything like that that's kind of trying to like alleviate the harm in any way. And then carbon sequestration is definitely the most ambiguous one, but that's technology that removes and stores the carbon in our atmosphere. Carbon sequestration is broken up into three other categories. That's graphene production. So graphene production is using carbon dioxide as a raw material to create graphene for like your touch screens and all of that. There's direct air capture, which is a really cool one, but unfortunately the science isn't necessarily there yet. It's still really, really expensive, but there's hope. That's literally removing carbon from the air via like advanced technology plants. And then the last one is engineered molecules, which is kind of what it sounds. It's engineered molecules that single out and capture carbon.
Got it. That is pretty complicated, but you did a good job of boiling it down to something that wasn't too complicated. So
science and math aren't my things.
So how realistic are the majority of solutions that you come across, like with the work that you're doing at Climate People or whatever you see in this space? Because you mentioned direct air capture as an example of something that's not far enough along to be realistic. So have you identified what, in your opinion, I'm not going to hold you to it, but what kind of makes the most sense within climate tech, or any kind of themes that you've seen on like, okay, this is what gives me the most hope and this is what seems to be most realistic?
Yeah, so with Climate People, we do work with all of the different areas of climate tech, but we do funnel almost all of our initiatives and resources into mitigation, just because we like to say we're optimists in the fight against climate change, and that kind of is where the most optimism is, and where we can kind of look at it from the beginning of the process all the way to the end. So like you look at the raw materials, you look at the production, and then you look at the manufacturing and the implementation. And mitigation has technologies at every single one of those steps so that we can kind of rewrite traditional frameworks and just redo the way that we currently do things. So it's like not necessarily adapting to the consequences or already removing the carbon that's already in the air. It's kind of like, what steps can we do to rewrite the way that we're doing things? So like electric vehicles, for example, is a great one. Like you have your car, you want to get from place to place, you need this like this source of transportation. Rather than completely getting rid of the car, you're just gonna adapt and get an electric vehicle, and like kind of ways to make those type of technologies more widespread. So yeah, definitely mitigation is, I think, the most promising, but again, all of the sectors have lots of hope, and I think time will come. The thing with this industry is as climate change gets worse, these technologies are growing. ClimateTech has so much venture capital investment right now. The field is growing rapidly. So the advancements are only going to continue to get better. So it's like a sad thing within a good thing too. It's as the issues become more pressing, the faster we're adopting solutions.
Yeah. On that topic, so like the way that you just described the way that you look at mitigation is pretty holistic. And I thought that was great to just like see how, you mentioned like raw materials and that whole process.
Yeah.
How do you, either as an individual or through Climate People, up to you, how do you think about climate justice? And I'm specifically asking like, because climate tech, as I've known it, has been very much dominated by people with resources. And the big problem that I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this, is like the solutions are really cool, but a lot of times I personally don't think that they're solving the right problems.
Yeah.
For example, if we're talking about Louisiana's Cancer Alley or something, like
Yeah.
there are social services that might be better at addressing that than technology. So I'm kind of wondering, like, do you think those are at odds? How do you kind of think about environmental justice as a whole, especially because climate tech investment is really honestly focused on a specific demographic of people, at least over the past few years, as I've seen it?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really important and big topic to dive into. I can kind of talk on it from two different lenses. One from the recruiting lens and the importance of recruiting a diverse workforce and all of that. Then I also want to just touch a little bit on like you were saying about like how the investment's not really going to the right place per se. So I'll start with the recruiting lens. Obviously, like as we all know, these environmental issues are impacting historically marginalized communities at a way higher rate than they are other people, and these people are going to see the effects way quicker and way more intensely than other people will. So I think that that's a really important thing to address. And then in order to create these technologies and scale them at the rate we need to, we have to pull from a variety of lived experiences. We have to account for all of this. So from a hiring perspective, it's essential to recruit a diverse set of people so that we can have those experiences, have those different perspectives and all of that. Climate People, we do this. Have you all ever heard of 1% to the Planet? We're a member of 1% to the Planet, and 1% for the Planet is an environmental organization that like companies collaborate with. They become members with 1% of the Planet, and then for every like at the end of the year, 1% of all of their profits go to an environmental nonprofit. So Climate People has chosen 5 environmental nonprofits, and we wanted to focus on nonprofits that worked with our DEI initiatives. So we have an LGBTQ plus nonprofit, Indigenous people profit, environmental justice nonprofit, all of these. And then for every candidate that we place in a role, we donate 1% of that placement fee to these environmental nonprofits. So I think it's essential for companies like this to do similar initiatives and really just ensure that they're having actions to back their words, and then also ensuring that they are recruiting a diverse set of individuals and not just perpetuating the stereotype of tech being all white men. And then also back to like what you were saying about how these climate technologies are not necessarily going to the right resources. I think a really good example of that is how we're moving away from natural gas in our kitchens, and a lot of people are doing like electric stoves and things like that. And unfortunately, it's really easy for someone with a lot of money to quickly make that change and have all of those resources. But unfortunately, people who don't are going to be stuck with their gas stoves. And then, of course, when people stop using gas as much, the prices of gas is going to drastically spike, and then they're going to be stuck with these gas stoves. So there are a lot of initiatives out there that are helping impoverished communities get ahead of that curve and doing all of that. So yeah, I agree. I think it is an issue, and I think we need to funnel money into those organizations that are going to help. And then yeah, I'm sure I'd be open to hear what everyone else thinks is a solution to that too, but definitely think it's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. If anyone has questions or comments, Lynn just said, I like that you recognize those different groups. Underrepresented identities go beyond just ethnicity, and it's important to address others like ability, gender representation, etc. And I totally agree. With like ability to, wildfires are very literally close to my heart, being from California, and that's been like a big topic for the past 2 years of my life, is like, you know, just learning about how different evacuations look if you are able-bodied versus not, and how different it's like set up to, you know, not resource specific groups of people. So I think it's really cool that you picked kind of like 5 different nonprofits that span different areas. So my last question, and then I'll hold some space if anyone else wants to ask questions, or if not, we can just, Natalie, get your contact info, figure out how to stay in touch. We got like 5 minutes left, but one question that I really wanted to ask you is, how do you think people can use their skills for good when it's not obvious? So for example, you know, if you know that you want to, I think in this situation, it might be even easier to like look for a new job than apply your skills to your existing job, because when you're looking for a new job, it's like adaptation, mitigation, all the things that you said, and you can kind of like start fresh. But for example, last week at our Soapbox Fest, one of our attendees was like, I am a VP of product management, and I don't think I can make a difference in climate change because I don't work at a climate company or have a climate background. So for kind of like that category of people where, you know, let's say you're working in like Cisco or something like that, how can you give some ideas on like getting more creative on like using the skills that you already have to make a difference towards climate change and social impact?
Yeah, you're playing right to my key point that I've been saying a million times, is the power of individual action. I think it's oftentimes really easy to be like, I work for Cisco, I am not gonna care in my professional life, like there's nothing I can do. And if I worked for an environmental nonprofit, things would be different. And like, that's the easy way out. I argue that there's always something that you can do. It kind of goes right back into ClimateTech too. It's all about rewriting the traditional processes, and it doesn't have to be some fancy multi-million-dollar technology to do that. If you notice that, for example, like if you're working in food packaging, that you're putting all of these things in plastic, and they don't necessarily have to be in plastic. It's as simple as saying like, hey, why don't we just do this instead, or this, and like, I know that's easier said than done, but just being aware of it in your day-to-day, and then having those harder to have conversations and just being conscious of it. You don't have to switch jobs, you don't have to create this technology. There are little things that you can do every single day. And then I always like to say, like, it does go from the bottom up. If everyone at Cisco is having similar complaints, the company's gonna notice that, and they're gonna want to make those changes. It doesn't necessarily have to come from the top to the bottom. I think that's often a common misconception, and a lot of times it does have to come from the top to the bottom, but in some instances it doesn't. So just, yeah, doing little things like that. And then back to the optimism, which I keep saying, it's like, try to remain optimistic and do act on those little things, and don't think of it as all being these long-term things. Like, there can be short-term results from the little things that you're doing. And even if you changing this one food plastic waste thing at your company doesn't change the entire organization's environmental footprint. It does in a little bit, and that little bit does matter.
Love it. I think Jason has a question. What's
Yeah.
up, Jason?
Yeah, no, I'm just curious, like, with what you've seen so far, Natalie, are you getting more candidates kind of come to you based off of, like, you know, the instinct that they have or the content that you're putting out there, or a combination of all of the above, where they're like, you know, I've been at Cisco, I do want to go and do something that's more focused on my day-to-day, you know, job. And like, are you seeing that from a candidate perspective?
Honestly, it's a mix of both. We do have like probably a half of our candidates are like, look, I have this passion and I want to do it in my professional life. And then the other half are kind of surprised to know that there's a space for them in this industry. And that's similar to like my experience is like, I knew I wanted to do it and I was like very pleasantly surprised to know that I could. So yeah, it does go half and half, but I think it's awesome when candidates are that have that passion already, but then it's equally as awesome when like you can inspire them to act and inspire them to take on those roles.
For sure. Nice.
Yeah, of course.
Does anyone have any last questions? And then I actually have a last question, but I'll pause for a second. Okay. So you mentioned that, you know, working in climate tech keeps you optimistic because it's solutions oriented. And I just wanted to like follow up on that. Given that like the world is kind of crappy, how do you stay optimistic? Is it like mainly your job, like you mentioned, or do you have any other thoughts on like, as things are, you know, dwindling from like a emissions perspective, what keeps you going?
Yeah, I mean, I really think professionally with my job, there's going to be 25 million American jobs in this industry over the next 15 years. That's 25 million jobs that are going to be going to make this impact. And yeah, I like pride myself and like wake up every morning and like one of Climate People's main pillars is making an impact. And I find it really easy to be optimistic and find that passion and that desire to work every single day when you think of it from the lens of the difference you're making rather than the difference you're not making. It's kind of really similar to what I was talking about with the job applications, like what you're doing rather than what you're not doing. So just like flipping your perspective. And then another thing is like in this industry, I'm sure all of you have seen it, is like we're all working towards the same common goal. I feel like a lot of times in corporate America, like I experienced, it was kind of like cutthroat and beat you down. But here, like every person I talk to, every event I attend, it's just leaves me feeling like, okay, there's so many amazing people in this industry who have the same passions and have the same drive that I do, and they want to make a difference. Yeah, and it's kind of hard to be negative when you're surrounded by such positive and hardworking people. So yeah, remaining optimistic and seeing it for what it is, and then also just having these conversations, attending these events, and surrounding yourself with like-minded people is really inspiring.
Thank you so much, Natalie. How do we stay in touch with you? How do we help out what you're doing at Climate People?
So I can follow up with all of our links. ClimatePeople.com is our website. Our handle for all social media is @ClimatePeople. You can add me on LinkedIn, all of that. We have a newsletter that goes out if you're looking for jobs. Definitely hit me up and I can help you with that. I don't know if any of you have a recruiting background or know anyone with a recruiting background, but we're hiring recruiters to work at Climate People right now. We're growing rapidly, and honestly, we're kind of drowning in all of the work that we need. So yeah, all of that. But yeah, I'll follow up or I can send it to you and we can follow up with all of that.
Yeah, just send it to you. I'll post it in our little post-event recap.
Climate People though, that's everything.
What is the experience level you're looking for in a recruiter? I think I saw a technical recruiter and then a recruiting lead on your website.
Right now we're looking for experienced recruiters, like over 2 years, preferably. But again, I applied for a job that didn't even exist. So really just want to have this conversation. So if you're interested, let me know and we can talk. But
cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking that question, Will. And everyone, thanks for attending. Natalie, thanks for walking us through this. Last thing I'll say before we drop is I'll post on the recap and tag you. Natalie has an amazing presentation that you can go through later, basically like laying out what she talked about with like sequestration, adaptation, mitigation, all those different pillars. And it was just like really, really informative and a good thing to just like keep bookmarked if you ever need to look at it. So you will get that as well as a couple blog posts that I think there's like, I think you wrote one that's like, is there a space for me in climate tech or something like that that I liked. So I will add those on our post-event recap. But up till then, check out the Climate People website, either if you're looking for a job or if you just want to look at their blog articles. And I will see you all later. Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us so generously. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate y'all having me. It was so much fun to meet all of you and be surrounded by inspirational people.
Awesome. All right. I will talk to you
Alrighty.
all later and look out for the recap in the next few hours.
Alrighty.
Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.